we feel bad because of self-criticism throughout the day, for example, and then we reach for food and then we feel guilty or shame because let's say we've now, either binged or overate or gave into a craving we said we were going to stop. And now this shame causes additional stress in our bodies. And so this stress affects our nervous system. And so as that builds, now that leads to restriction oftentimes, which leads to cravings, which then again lead to reaching for food. So that cycle can be very difficult to break. We feel like it's an external situation that happened, but truly it's an internal job.
Welcome to the Dr. Miiko Rowley Show, Functional Medicine Unlocked, where we explore what it means to heal in today's world. I'm Dr. Miiko Rowley, a board-certified family medicine physician and medical director of Kale Functional Medicine, a physician-led practice here in Houston. If you want to better understand your body and take a more active role in your health, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Today, we're talking about emotional eating. Not just what it looks like, but why it happens, especially in people doing everything right on paper and still feel like their body is working against them. Joining me today is Dr. Aalia Barwani. Dr. Aalia is a double board-certified physician in family medicine and obesity medicine, and the founder of Obesity Wellness. Her work focuses on helping high-performing women who feel stuck despite doing all the right things understand the deeper drivers behind their health challenges. She integrates evidence-based medicine with behavioral science and nervous system regulation to help support sustainable change. Her approach helps patients move beyond willpower and build patterns that are actually aligned with how their body works. Dr. Barwani, I'm really excited to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Some patients we see are incredibly disciplined in every area of their life, except for one. What does it do to someone's identity when they're successful in every way, but can't get their control of food down pat?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that I see a lot with the women that I work with, in that we're high achieving women. We have been able to achieve so much success in our personal lives, in our careers. And when it comes to food, we still feel like there's just a disconnect. There's that part of us that we feel like we're failing at because we can't achieve success there. And so for a lot of us, what can happen is this can feel very personal. And even though we have evidence of success in other aspects of our lives, this becomes the one area that we focus on because it's the one area we feel we failed at. And so we know where we focus on, where we put our attention, that's where we like what you focus on grows. And so this becomes now the thing that defines us. And so for a lot of women, it then takes on the shape of their identity. So even though they have all this mountain of evidence that they are not failures, because of this one thing that they've put so much focus on to try and solve that they're still struggling with, they then internalize that message that they are failures. So it starts to look like lack of confidence, and it can look like maybe feeling uncertain about making decisions. And so it can start to affect other aspects of their lives as well as a result of this shifting of this one part of them to now encompass their whole identity.
Yeah, it's always that one thing that is the negative experience or the thing we can't do that erases all of the good that we show up with.
Exactly.
When someone says, I'm doing everything right, but I just can't seem to get this right, what's going on beneath that?
Yeah, that happens a lot. And I used to see this a lot in primary care as well as when I shifted into obesity medicine, is this idea that I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I have the information, but I just can't do the thing. And so this gap between knowing and doing is where I've really discovered my niche, which is to really address the mindset of it all. What are we telling ourselves? What are the stories that we're telling ourselves that's not allowing us to bridge that gap? And so I like to use this example because tax season just came and went. And for example, doing our taxes, right? Like we know for the most part, we can get a software or go online or get somebody to help us with our taxes. So we kind of know the logistics or like the mechanics of it. And yet we often procrastinate, right? Or for anything that you're procrastinating, we tell ourselves stories like, oh, it'll take me forever. I've got to get all these documents together, or I'm just not good at math, or I just hate doing this because it makes me feel uncomfortable. We tell ourselves stories that then kind of delay our ability to do the one thing that kind of feels like now it's looming over us. And so what can happen is we wait for an external factor or an external element to now impose a deadline, right? Like the IRS. Or in the case of our healthcare, it can look like a health scare. So oftentimes it's this external factor that's driving us to now do the one thing. And so oftentimes what I ask of myself and my clients is, what is the story you're telling yourself about this thing that's making you feel like you're unable to kind of bridge that gap? And that can be the beginning of bringing awareness to some limiting ideas or beliefs that we have.
As a high performing woman myself, and I know you're probably guilty or successful because of the same drive, we push through discomfort.
Mhm.
That's how we know how to operate.
Yeah.
At what point does this become not about strategy, but become about our relationship with food? When does that take over?
Yeah, it's a great question. For a lot of us, what happens is that this drive, as you just beautifully illustrated, can be part of our success, right? The reason we've achieved the successes that we have. And we rely on it as well when it comes to other aspects, such as with emotional eating. However, what happens is willpower is, first of all, finite, and it relies on conscious effort. And conscious effort is just a small part of what drives our behavior. 95% of that is subconscious. And so when you've run out of willpower, when you're exhausted at the end of the day, when you've had a rough day, you're going to fall back on the 95%, which was your subconscious habits and beliefs and behaviors. And so what we relied on initially, our conscious mind, our kind of prefrontal cortex to make executive decisions, when we're in this automatic behavior, that's not what's in the driver's seat. We go offline at that point and we're just running off of learned behaviors. And so if you have learned that at the end of the day, when you're ready to process unprocessed emotions throughout the day, and you just don't have the tools to cope with that, or the tools to process that, we're going to reach for something that's fast, reliable, and accessible. And oftentimes that's food. And so once we start doing that and we realize, oh, I feel much better after doing that, right? So initially, because of how food can trigger with the reward centers in our brain, it can offer us relief, real relief in the moment, but it's fleeting, and it's just biochemical, right?
Mm.
And then once that's gone, there's then now this like guilt shame cycle that can often follow after somebody has indulged in emotional eating over time.
Hmm.
Mhm.
In functional medicine, we talk a lot about finding root causes,
Mhm.
and nervous system regulation is at the foundation of that. How does a dysregulated nervous system shape behaviors like cravings and emotional eating and lead to that loss of control?
Yeah, it's another great question. And it's also the foundation of a lot of the work that I do as well. And so I'll start by first defining what it means to even have a regulated nervous system, because I think that term can mean different things, right, for different people. And so just to set kind of a level playing field, a regulated nervous system is one that's flexible, right? It's not one where you're always happy or one necessarily, but it means that you can respond appropriately to the situation and then bounce back from it. So you have a stressful day, you can address that stress, be in that mode, and then you can kind of turn off at the end of the day and be in rest mode. And you can kind of do that even throughout your day, not necessarily at the end of the day, but throughout your day, kind of having that flexibility of being on and then being able to step back. For a lot of us, especially women, we're stuck on all the time. And so we're always kind of going. And so what can happen as a result of that is we don't know how to rest. And so we all probably know, and maybe some of us are the type of woman who says, I don't know how to just sit still. I don't know how to be quiet. I don't know how to just rest, right? We're always trying to find the next thing that we want to be doing. And so what can happen is oftentimes we've got multiple roles. And so the time that we have to kind of sit and reflect on our day, or where it gets quiet, is after the kids have gone to bed and things get quiet at the end of the day and we're wrapping up and winding down. And sometimes the emotions that we didn't have time and space to feel, process, and examine. So let's say you had some feedback from your boss or coworker and it didn't feel good in your body, right? It was some negative or, you know, meant to be feedback and we took it as criticism, right? Or we yelled at our kids because we got impatient and then we feel kind of guilty about that, or we snapped at our spouses, etc. So those emotions can come back up that we kind of push down because we know we just got to move on to the next thing.
Mhm.
And so as those emotions come up at the end of the night, we don't always have the tools or space or time to sit with it, to examine it and see what it is that we were actually feeling and what we can do instead to overcome and process it, right? It doesn't have to be food. However, food is convenient, it's always available. Um, and when we learn that food can give us that soothing or coping or distraction, we turn again and again to it. And so over time, that now becomes our built in behavior.
Mm. And then once we do, it feels good in the moment, but then we feel guilty about it and more shame, and that
Exactly.
cycle of shame just continues.
Exactly.
So, how does one get out of that cycle of guilt and shame? And how does that reinforce every pattern that someone is trying to break?
Yeah. So oftentimes we think, and I've had clients say that sometimes they'll use shame and guilt as a motivator, right?
Mm.
Whether they're conscious of it or not, a lot of us may do that. And I think that even in regular conversations, sometimes, especially around obesity, we feel like if we shame people about how they feel about their bodies, they'll do something about it, right?
Mm.
Like there was before things have started to kind of shift now. I won't say they've shifted all the way, but before we started to have more open conversations, there was a lot of passive aggression and maybe aggression against people's bodies when they were heavier or had obesity,
Mm.
right? And so we think again that shame can be a driver, but very rarely is shame a sustainable agent of change. And often what happens is because of self-criticism, we feel guilty or shame because let's say we've now, either binged or overate or gave into a craving we said we were going to stop. And now this shame causes additional stress in our bodies. And so this stress addresses or affects our nervous system, and so as that builds, now that leads to restriction oftentimes, which leads to cravings, which then again lead to reaching for food to soothe the, self-criticism and then food. So that cycle can be very hard, difficult to break without, first of all, realizing that it's happening. So oftentimes the first step I share with my clients is just realizing that that is happening, and then the next step is really understanding what is the trigger emotion. Oftentimes, we feel like it's an external situation that happened, but truly, it's an internal job. It's an inside
Mm.
job, I like to say. And when you can recognize, again, the story you told yourself that then led to the emotion you're feeling in your body, that can begin to kind of build that opportunity where you can say, oh, it's not because I'm weak. It's not because I lack discipline. It's not because I'm a failure. This is the emotion I'm feeling. This is the story I'm telling myself. And then that can lead to curiosity, which can open so many doors to understanding more about yourself and the way that we behave.
Mm. And it sounds like that's the beginning of starting to build this internal safety system.
Exactly.
What does it mean when someone does not feel safe in their own body? And then how does that influence their ability to change?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so often, when we don't feel safe in our body, it's because we're perceiving threats in our external or internal environment, whether, again, it's something that we have, whether it's something we heard and then we converted it into something, a different meaning internally. So, again, back to those stories we're telling ourselves. So, another example in our day to day life, right, is an email comes through and we hear the ping on our phone. And so some of us may, what it can, something that's an external, like very neutral thing in our minds, we're like, oh my God, more work. right?
Mhm.
For example. And so it goes back to, and so if that's what you're telling yourself, it means oftentimes that you are scanning for threats in your environment. You're anticipating something that will feel like it's an encroachment on your time, on your money, on your whatever it is, on your autonomy. And so you're, again, telling yourself something that makes you feel threatened when really it's just a neutral thing. And when we realize that our brains actually will it's our brains are such remarkable and funny organs systems, really the nervous system altogether, that we can tell ourselves a different story. So if and sometimes it takes a little bit of work, a little bit of getting into the habit and making it routine. And sometimes when you're working with the subconscious, it can be a lot faster. But, imagine that ping is somebody sending you money. Like, wouldn't you be so much more immediately, right? Like you want to smile at that. So the stories, again, we tell ourselves can impact how we feel in our bodies, which in turn affect our nervous system. And I forgot the question at this point, but I hope I've answered it.
Yes, it was about,
Okay.
how that safety,
Mhm.
that notion of internal safety informs, someone's ability to change.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And so
yeah.
to that end, with respect to, again, then bringing it to change is, if you're always in survival mode, so to speak, right? You're always anticipating that a lion is going to come running after you, whether it's, thankfully, most of us don't live in an environment where there's going to be a real lion chasing us. But if we are always perceiving that, that email or that phone call or that text or that feedback is a threat to our safety, we're always going to be on survival mode. So our nervous system is going to always be in that on mode. And when you're running from a lion, you're not going to change. You're just going to be running, right? So you're not going to see options. You're not going to have your executive function, the front part of your brain kind of engaged, where you can open up to expansion and choice and all of those beautiful things we know we can do when we're in a more regulated state.
Mm. So it sounds like that's a turning point in your patient's journey when they can go from, um, having that guilt and shame and that cycle of emotion that leads to emotional eating to recognizing that they can intervene and shift that nervous system response to certain triggers. What does that moment look like
Yeah.
for your patients when they have that revelation that they've got tools to end this constant
Yeah.
cycle of negative emotion?
Honestly, it's such a beautiful and emotional moment when I hear my clients kind of recognizing and seeing the patterns for themselves and say to themselves, "Oh, they can now distance their emotions and their behavior from their identity," right? And so it becomes less about this is me, as this is something that a part of me was doing. And now I can recognize that. And when you can separate and give yourself a little bit of space from who you are and what you're doing in that part of you, because also another part that I bring into my work is internal family systems. So this idea that we have different parts of us that are responsible for different roles in our day to day. When we can take a step back and recognize a different part of us and look at it objectively, we have curiosity again, right? And that allows them to now start to build that relationship with that part and get to know it more and give it capacity and give it space to just be. And then that transformation can be so beautiful on their journey individually.
How do you make that shift from taking high performing women from being very controlling over their emotions and their internal environment as well as their external environment to understanding that behavior and then directing it in a different way?
Yeah, that's another amazing questions. So the shift really starts with the smallest step that I start with for a lot of my clients is really understanding how they're currently seeing their problem and understanding that actually there may be a different way to see that. And so as we have been talking about, oftentimes they're tying this behavior to an identity. And so by allowing them and guiding them through reframing, through different subconscious techniques, through emotional tapping, where they can start to feel safe in their body and they are no longer in survival mode. And now they can see things from a different perspective. And then we move into using other tools. I use something called anchoring, so kind of anchoring emotions in their body, so allowing them to feel something different in their body, and then also having capacity to recognize what's happening in their day. So we talk about how to use all of these tools. And the beautiful thing that I see with a lot of my clients is once they have these tools, it no longer becomes just about reaching for food to soothe. And that's not to say that it won't sometimes happen, but the point is we don't want it to be their primary coping mechanism, right? And so, and even if they do, it's a conscious choice. Sometimes it does still happen, but they recognize, yeah, I'm actually choosing to have this chocolate bar in this moment, and it's not something I do all the time, or it's not something that I do automatically. So that in and of itself is also a win, because they start to recognize how they can address the different emotions they're experiencing. They can feel more calm about how they are at work, how they are with their children, with their spouses, and they are in the world. And that begins to change those relationships as well. So it's actually quite transformative in that way. Yeah.
Oh. How do you typically work with patients? Are you seeing them one-on-one in group sessions? Is it a mix for every patient?
Yeah, that's a great question too. Gosh. So I see, primarily see them one-on-one. I do with emotional eating specifically. I do have a group coaching cohort that I launch every so many months. I'm just launched one actually last month. I'll be launching another one later in the summer. And so generally, I do offer the group coaching. Those tend to do really well because when you can see that you're not alone and that there are other people who are just as high achieving as you are dealing with the same issues, it can be, it can really foster that sense of community and normalize something that we often don't talk about, and realize and can recognize that it's just a symptom. Emotional eating is just a symptom, a messenger that hints towards a deeper issue with nervous system regulation and stress management, things like that. And so that's one option. And then I do also do one-on-one. For some people just don't like to be in groups, and so I do offer one-on-one as well.
What other ways have you seen this nervous system dysregulation play out? You
Mhm.
might have patients who say, well, overeating isn't my issue, but over shopping is, or over, spending too much time on social media. What other ways do you see this playing out?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with those examples. Oftentimes so if we go back to what I mentioned earlier about internal family systems and different parts, often when we feel uncomfortable emotions, we have this kind of like tiger mom part, right? They're called actually firefighters. It's the reactive part that kind of jump to attention as a protection. So this part doesn't want us to feel uncomfortable emotions, and so what it does is it'll uh, get you to indulge in something, oftentimes addictive type behaviors. So overeating as an addictive, it could be drinking, it could be drugs, it could be shopping, it could be doom scrolling, especially now with social media. And we know that that is so highly addictive as well. And sometimes it's shut down. Sometimes it's just shutting down and not wanting to engage with anyone or anything for a period of time until you've kind of like, you know that emotion or that uncomfortableness has dissipated. So that can be a lot of times what happens with the clients that I work with. Kind of going into, like, some people will clean, for example. So just going into overproductive mode and just feeling like I've got to go do this and this and this, and making more lists and finding more things to do,
Mm,
right? And so for a lot of the women I work with who are used to being productive, shutdown's not an option. So they're like, well, I'll clean the entire house from top to bottom,
mm,
or I'll give myself more things to do so I don't have to sit in this uncomfortableness.
mm.
Yeah.
Wow, this is an incredibly valuable conversation, Dr. Alia, but especially for people who feel like they're stuck in these
Mm.
patterns and are hearing for the first time that there's a brain shift that can happen. It doesn't have to be some, huge undertaking. There are just some simple tools, and they're accessible
Mhm.
to get to a place of nervous system regulation. For anyone watching or listening who wants to learn more about Abhidaya Wellness, how can they find you?
I am at albudaya_wellness on social media. So I'm on YouTube, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, or go to my website and I have free clarity calls. So if you're dealing with emotional eating or nervous system regulation that's got you kind of always on that on mode and you want help regulating and being able to kind of go between the two, book a clarity call. It's 30 minutes. It's a free consultation where we can just chat a little bit and I actually give you some small steps that you can start to take so that you can feel that difference immediately. And then it's an invitation to continue the work one-on-one if you'd like.
I love that. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss future conversations. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.